guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly Q&A videos. This is Season 8, Episode 23. If you are on YouTube, you can check out this on most of the major podcasting platforms by clicking the links in the description below. And that's it for housekeeping.
Yeah.
You have some stuff you want to talk about before we get into questions.
First, we came close to missing a second week in a row. I'm feeling a little bit... That's why this one, I think we're going to try to keep it a little short, because I'm not feeling great.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to blow it off 2 weeks in a row. Last week was exams. This week is I'm not feeling that great. Mm-hmm. So, you know. But
Show must go on.
The show must go on. I wanted to mention a really great book I read recently. And during the pandemic, I've been having a lot of trouble reading long-form work. Part of it is just the concentration. I mean, it's weird, right? Because I've got more time. I'm spending less time commuting to work. I have more time to read, but I'm having more trouble concentrating. Mm-hmm. So that's why this was actually even particularly good. It's Sarah Gailey's Echo Wife. And so a little bit of background. We've already reviewed one of Sarah Gailey's books before. Mm-hmm. It was River of Teeth. It was a novella about an alternate world where there were hippos. And it was sort of like a alternate world hippo western fantasy, which was really cool. Did you read it?
I did read it, yeah.
And originally I found them on Twitter. They had recommended Jade City that had a sequel, Jade War. Great books. And a previous novel by Gailey was Magic for Liars. And it was described as Harry Potter for grown-ups and compared favorably to Lev Grossman's A Magician series, which I have not read. Mm-hmm. I think it's on Prime Video, a Map of Tiny Perfect Things?
No, I'm not familiar.
So it was based on a short story written by Lev Grossman. He wrote the screenplay. There's a really cool moment. It was a fun movie, but there's a really cool moment. So spoiler, I shouldn't spoil it. Never mind, because you haven't seen it.
Well, I just read it, but...
Oh, you read it?
No, I just read it in your notes.
Oh, sorry.
So that's fine.
Yeah, the main character suddenly realizes... Oh, so sorry. Spoiler, 10 seconds. The main character suddenly realizes he's not the main character. It's really neat. Like, it's a really neat kind of meta thing to do in the story. Anyway, sorry. Yeah. This is not about Lev Grossman. So, Echo Wife, if you're going to read it, don't read the jacket copy, because it has some early spoilers that I think you'd enjoy them a little bit more if you came to it naturally.
So I didn't know what you meant by jacket copy. That's literally the little blurbs inside the jacket that sort of gives you the summary.
Yeah, so they put stuff on the flaps of the jacket, and they put stuff on the back of the jacket.
Yeah.
And so it's meant to make you want to read it, but I guess it runs into the same kind of problem with, when you watch a trailer for a movie, and if a really good trailer...
for some reason, now, like, most of them just are, like, a 30-second summary of the movie. That,
and they spoil all the best parts. Right. But I guess if the movie's not that great, and you want to get people to watch it, you have to show them something that'll make them want to see it.
That's true. And it's stuff like that, which is one of the reasons why I liked... Infinity War Endgame? Mm-hmm. Was it Endgame Part 2? Or was Endgame the Part 2 of Infinity War? I don't remember how they're named. But the second sort of big Avengers movie in that two-parter.
Okay.
Part of the reason why I liked it so much was because I watched it on the first day, and it was totally not what I was expecting at all.
Yeah.
I think we can spoil it now, because I think anybody who cares enough has
the
probably
statute of limitations has passed?
Yeah, but we're going to talk about the Endgame spoilers a little bit, where, you end up with sort of Thanos doing his stuff, right?
Right.
And then you expect it to be more of a, I don't know, they're going to mount an attack against Thanos, they're going to do something.
Right.
And then, like, the first bit of the movie, they kill Thanos. And then they spend a lot of time being sad about how half of everyone is dead.
Right.
And there's, like, Captain America's running, like, a therapy group. And it's just so many weird things happen, and then it turns into a time heist movie. And there was a certain point where it sort of has a long, slow arc back to what I was expecting a Marvel movie to be, right? Where it's just a bunch of people sort of beating up each other, but with, like, really cool CGI.
Right.
And because I went in expecting a movie where a bunch of people beat each other up with really cool CGI, and then watched, like, a time heist and them killing the main bad guy in, like, the first 10 minutes of the movie, and then, like... Captain America running a therapy group. It was so weird and off-kilter that by the time they got back to exactly what I was expecting the movie to be when I stepped in, it felt like a breath of fresh air. Because
but that's cool.
Yeah, because I had no clue, but it kept being like, what? What?
All right, but that makes it really cool, right? Because I think part of what happens with the extended universe like that is it becomes too much of the same thing.
Yeah.
And so for you, they were able to...
They surprised me over and over and over again, and then I was almost a little surprised when they did exactly what I thought was going to happen just before I started, not at the point that I was at in the movie.
Oh! You know, the way you're describing how you feel is exactly how I felt at the end of Replay.
Yeah?
Where Ken Grimwood, that was you read that book, right? We talked about this.
It was good.
So that there's a moment right at the end where there's a statement that's relatively cliche, but it hits you it hit me so much harder because of the journey that it happened
to it.
Yeah. So that's exactly. All right. So this is interesting because the way you're describing it as it originally starting as a time travel heist movie.
It didn't even start. That was like the middle third.
Okay, so the middle third, the second act.
Yeah.
So Echo Wife. I want to say it's a thriller, and it's weird for me to say that because I've always had a strange relationship with the categorizing books in a way that it's instead of the kind of plot devices that are used or the conventions that are part of it, like, mystery, science fiction, fantasy.
Yeah.
Thriller and horror are supposed to make you feel a certain way. Mm-hmm. And this is absolutely a thriller. There's definitely, say, plot points that are telegraphed really early. And it seems like probably intentionally. There's certain things that you're meant to, that are revealed to you very gently so that you get that joy of feeling like you're figuring it out as it goes along, which is kind of cool. It's almost impossible not to because of the underlying conceit, which I'm not going to spoil because if you're going to read it, again, skip right past the jacket copy. But there are some really powerfully emotional moments in it that really caught me off guard. Okay. And I love that kind of thing where it's not, when you feel like you're manipulated, but really well. Right? Like if it's not subtle and they're sort of jerking around, I don't like that. I don't appreciate it. It feels a little bit ham-fisted, right? But there was some really, and it was really kind of thrilling. Like, and it had a lot of interesting things to say. And the other thing, and I like this a lot in books, and I think I've said this before, is I've never been a scientist. I've never been in those kind of situations, but there's a real authenticity to it, right? Yeah. That, even though I don't have enough to say, yeah, this is real. You know how when you read a book or watch a movie and it's something you have experience with and it feels like, oh, that they wouldn't do that. That just doesn't sound right. That would be, I was really drawn into it. Like it was pretty, after promising not to spoil stuff. So there's a scientist and that struggle with funding and, working university, that just felt really real. And there's some interesting things that it does, and I'm not sure I can really wrap my head around it yet enough to be able to describe properly, but it does a lot of things really well about addressing the idea of victim blaming. And I don't think it does it directly. I think it's more what I bring to it, because I know that there's a lot of situations where people sort of get away with bad behavior because the victims are not perfect. Yeah. Right? They're not... There's the opportunity for people who want to justify what the bad guy's done.
Yeah, you discredit the person who the bad thing happened to, and then you try to frame it like it's some sort of like karmic justice or it doesn't matter, right? Like it's like, oh, well, it's not a bad thing happening to a good person. It's a bad thing happening to, a person who's done whatever thing, and the implication is supposed to be it's a bad thing happening to a bad person. Normally.
Right. So this is kind of really cool because the main character is complicated. There's definitely, I keep on using the same words. There's a complexity to the main character that makes it that much more interesting, especially when Gailey does this thing where, despite all their flaws, you really sort of, I really identified and empathized with the character. Anyways, I really enjoyed it.
That's fun.
I had a lot of fun.
Okay.
And I had all these other things I'd been thinking about saying about how, like, comparing it to how Taylor Swift won that thing against the DJ. Oh, yeah. And how Masai Ujiri, I was screwing up his name, Masai Ujiri, the president of the Raptors, was sued because for assault, even though the security guard actually assaulted him. And he finally won, but it means that a lot of times that until you actually have the perfect situation in real life, at least, you end up not getting justice when you're the victim because of all the institutions that are set up to take advantage of you. I don't know. I'm rambling. I'm totally rambling. I think I probably should have thought about it a little bit more before I got into it, but it really, I really enjoyed it. It really moved me, and I think I'm going to let percolate it. Echo Wife. Yeah. Okay. Oh, and I should point out too, there was news last week that it's being made into movie. So this ties into something we said a couple of weeks ago, where if you really like to be in on the curve and like to read something first before it becomes really popular, if you're a hipster, this is a good time to read it because it's heading somewhere. If
you want to spoil the movie before it ever gets made, because most adaptations are not going to live up to the books.
Oh, and I just saw Birds of Prey recently, and despite all the bad reviews, I remember seeing a lot of bad reviews for people who didn't like it. It was surprisingly good.
Okay.
I enjoyed it. There was a joy there that I haven't seen in comic book movies lately.
Really?
It's there's
like different from like Guardians of the Galaxy and all those other sort of like lighter stuff.
It's a simplicity. It's there. It touches on a lot of stuff. It doesn't do it light at the expense of being frivolous or superficial. Like it touches on some really interesting things, and I was really surprised. I did not expect to like it. I had some moments I was getting a workout in, and I thought, why not? Really good.
So that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Lots of fun media.
Yeah.
I don't think I've gone through any fun media recently. We can talk. You know what? I'll talk about something that I am watching recently.
Yeah.
That I do have thoughts about, which is Scrubs. I've been watching Scrubs recently.
Yeah.
And I've never watched it before. And you have, how much of Scrubs have you watched?
I did not watch much. I mean, it was okay, but it was never must watch when it was first out.
Yeah. So I've talked with people who did sort of watch it as it was coming out in its time.
Yeah.
And the interesting realization that I've come to is that the main character is a lot less likable now.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the dudes are kind of misogynist in the show. Yeah. There's a lot of sort of unchecked assumptions and things that are taken for granted that don't need to be addressed.
Right.
And I think a lot of stuff is played off as like the men, right?
Yeah.
And that it's sort of like goofball, harmless stuff.
Right.
That's a little more insidious in these. So the interesting thing is not that there's no good sort of male characters in it, but they have a lot of characters in moments where they justify speaking down to people and being really sort of dismissive and rude as like a defensive mechanism, but that you should actually interpret people being rude or angry as them putting emotional effort into you.
Oh, it's like a good thing. So it's nice that they actually do something, even if it's a crappy thing that they do.
Yeah. And that's one of the characters. Dr. Cox is just really sort of like super rude to everybody.
Yeah.
And he's supposed to be, I don't know, he's like the semi-sympathetic character. I think he's maybe supposed to be a complex character.
Right.
Because he like cares about patients to differing extents and like will try to like get people procedures even if they don't have insurance and do like little workarounds like that.
Right.
But he's not as much, and the main character JD is played off as a lot more harmless when he says and does some stuff that is kind of crappy.
Yeah.
And there's a character who is very clearly all of the time supposed to be terrible and just like the actually sexist character.
Right.
But what's really interesting is because he's so
he's in your face about it.
He's really in your face about it, and because they were aware in the time that they were writing him that he kind of sucked.
Yeah.
That they needed to soften his rough edges a little bit. So he actually ends up coming across as much more harmless than the men who are just kind of subtly misogynistic, where he's totally in your face and he's constantly sort of making these really sort of like hyper ridiculous passes at like almost every woman in the vicinity, but because they know that that's gross and they don't want him to be hateable, they make it so that, people just go, no. And then he goes, okay. And then he just sort of walks away. And he is really one note like that. And he definitely has the potential to still make people really uncomfortable. Right. But they show him as not being super pushy. Just as being really, really, really forward and maybe not professional and like, inappropriate for the context, but not actually, they don't show him as making people uncomfortable or like putting people down in the same way that I think a lot of the men in the show do, that's played off actually as fine.
Right. So that's interesting because that is almost like the perfect example of have you heard of the idea of like the squeaky stare?
Yeah.
Where everybody knows that stare is squeaky, so they avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always new people who come along that are in danger. That's a squeaky stare. That guy. So because the context of the show is that these are all sort of regulars and they all know him, he's harmless because of that, right?
But it's not even, because the squeaky stare is more that you actually can't be engaged with him, that you're specifically supposed to avoid him. But so the thing is, he's making constant passes at people.
Yeah.
He's like, telling like all the girls that they should date him. He's making like a bunch of innuendo all the time. But another thing is like, like they all eat lunch with the guy. Right? And so like one of them will like get a boyfriend and he'll be like, oh nice, you're getting some or whatever, right? Yeah. So he's like, he's got a one-track mind, but he's actually like supportive of them doing their own stuff. He's not like, he doesn't feel like anybody owes him anything, because when they're like, no Todd, go away, he's like, right on, and then he just leaves, so it's more just that he's like, he's hanging out, and so they, and it's not that like he's not kind of gross, because he is a little gross. Right. But I think out of the male characters, he's actually one of the more likable dudes on the show, just because they knew that they had to handle him carefully. Right. Whereas for a lot of other stuff, it's a lot of unexamined assumptions versus him, which is like, he has like, the writers have enough self-awareness to write him as not a total trash fire that you really just could not like enjoy seeing on the screen.
It was a popular show at the time.
It was.
So this is another example of the suck fairy getting to it, where something that at the time was popular, if you go back to it, you'll find that it probably didn't age as well as you might have hoped.
I mean, I still think it's good. I still like it. But I was talking about it with somebody, and I was like, what the realization that I came to is that almost everything that was on the show, it's transphobic in different parts. Sure. Sort of like for no reason. Right. Like a lot of older stuff was.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that was, yeah.
But another realization is that the main character could totally still be on a show today, but they wouldn't be the main character. It'd be like Hitchcock or Scully from like Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Oh, okay. Right? That's funny. Right. Okay.
Where like he would say stuff. Right. And it's just like, I don't, this isn't like a specific example because I'm not remembering specific stuff, but like some, like one of his female friends would like come to him and be upset, and then he'd be like objectifying her or whatever. And it's it's just stuff like, it's like that type of thing where I'm like, oh, that's really gross. That's like weird. And I don't know why, like we're supposed to identify with this character or think he's likable. Yeah. And it's like, if you had him as sort of like that comedic relief character where he's constantly just putting his foot in his mouth and then saying weird, gross stuff, but the show is really aware of it. Right. Like, he in today's shows would be more like Todd from when the show was being made. So he's like, he's sort of would be downgraded to like that gross side character. Right. Oh, yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah. And it's not to say it's a bad show, and it's not to say that like, I don't like him sometimes. Right. I just find him a lot less likable than I think I'm supposed to.
Right. Well, you weren't the audience, right? Clearly. Yeah. That was when was it? 90s?
I think so. I don't remember exactly. Yeah. And I still think it's a good show.
Right. See, funny. This is sad too, because there's a lot of stuff that hasn't aged well. And I was thinking the other day that I was pretty happy that My So-Called Life aged well, because I liked that as a show. And then I just found out when they filmed the show, Jared Leto was 7 years older than Claire Danes. Oh, so it's a little bit, it's a little bit gross in a different way, right? Like it's it's almost sad. We're halfway through and we haven't even gotten to the questions yet.
Okay, so we'll get to our first question, and that comes from Gabriel, and they say, what is your guys' opinion on glitches? I know many people hate glitches and things that speed up game progress, but isn't that a good thing?
So, all right, this is kind of funny. It's a question that we don't get often, but it is asking about something that we've talked about at length before. I think we make the distinction between glitches and hacks, because it's all cheating, right? It's all a form of cheating where you're sort of playing the game that was not the intention of the developers, in a way that was not the intention of the developers. But I think the glitches, they're built in. It's not like you have to get some sort of script. You don't have to be a script kiddie and use some sort of software to break it and try to do stuff to it that it shouldn't. This is already there. I mean, it's if you had to guess, if you put yourself in the head of the developers, this is probably not intentional. But I think in a lot of ways, we've publicized glitches, right? Yeah, we've done a weekly glitch video for years. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think what it is because this is a free-to-play mobile game, so its business model is basically letting people pay to speed the game up. Right. which is what almost every single free-to-play business model is the only sort of two things you can do is say there's stuff that you can't get or can't do until you have money.
Yeah.
Or we're going to speed the game up and remove sort of barriers to getting stuff faster.
Right.
With money. And so glitches, in this case, aren't really that different from the types of stuff that you could get by just paying more money. And so I think why glitches work in this case is the whole model is that, you know, you're going to have to put in more time maybe than some people are willing to.
Right.
And you can pay money to sort of skip some of that time investment.
Yeah.
And so this is one of those specific cases in which, you know, I think glitches really are fine, and glitches actually sort of improve the experience of the game depending on how you're using them. And I think,
right.
you know, like anything else, there's a way for you to misuse them potentially. And, you know, you could have a worse experience of the game in the same way, like if you're just hacking, if you hack in the exact same stuff that you would glitch in,
mm-hmm.
right? And you sort of do it in little stages, and you go nice and slow, and you say, well, what if I just add like one more copy of one card, right? You could have the exact same experience hacking as you do glitching. And the reason why people don't is because it's a lot more easy to misuse hacks,
right?
And just give yourself everything and like really, really fundamentally change your experience with the game.
Yeah, like people putting in 1 billion credits.
Yeah, or
like they could put in 10 million, and that wouldn't be unbalancing, but they don't.
Or do stuff that you're literally not allowed to do, get characters that you're not supposed to have. So you know, I think glitching, the way that's used in Injustice, mostly gives you a relationship with the game that you could already have if you were willing to pay enough money. And so I think for that reason is why it's like more fine.
Why we feel like it's more fun is really the qualifier.
Yeah, and I do think that like the game as is in its standard form is really, really hard to accumulate resources. And so speeding up resource accumulation without sort of cutting out all the work required for it makes sense to me.
Right. All right.
Yeah, so there we go. So our next question comes from Apocalypse, and they say, going back to Q&A Season 8, Episode 19, and you'll know what we're talking about through context here if you haven't seen it. I too believe that all things should be equally enforced, and I do believe there should have been more police response to the Capitol Hill event. At the same time, I believe they should have arrested and prosecuted rioters at the Black Lives Matter protests, regardless of intentions, as they are doing to the Capitol Hill rioters. Instead, they had publicly funded bail funds, dropped charges, and outright refusal to press charges, whereas companies like Bank of America are willingly giving customer data to the FBI on purchases made in or around the Capitol at the time of the riot. I highly doubt they would have done so if they were looking for Black Lives Matter rioters. I would have more to say, but I don't think your listeners would like to hear about politics every week.
That's okay. We care more about what we want to talk about every week.
Yeah. And I mean, our stance on all of this should be relatively clear. I think at this point, anybody, like, you know, well, we donated to Black Lives Matters, but and did like a Black Lives Matters like giveaway after.
So the interesting question here, though, is: are they being treated the same, or are they being treated different? And I'm not sure that.
Like, if they acted the same way towards both groups, would that be equal treatment?
Because it depends on how you look at the differences and similarities of what was done, right? So, were they similar in property damage? Maybe. I mean, if you can be sure who did the property damage and weren't just around to be pushed around and beat up by cops, then maybe, you prosecute property damage the same way. And the key really to me is hurting people. I think when you hurt people, absolutely 100%, you need to hold people accountable. But think about it like this, though. The number of times that police officers were actually attacked versus rioters defending themselves after being attacked by police. If you take a look at that, you could make arguments about what happened, but given all the footage that has been released, the proportion of people participating in the Capitol Hill riots who were attacked by police was much lower, who were attacking police was much higher, and the ones carrying weapons also much higher. I mean, the number of police injuries and I want to say fatalities, but I'm not sure, was way higher in this one protest than all the Black Lives Matter protests over a year.
Yeah, and you know, there was the people with the zip tie handcuffs and guns.
Right.
Who, you know, you have those when you want to kidnap somebody. Yeah. Right? When you want to kidnap or incapacitate somebody.
Right.
Which is a totally different thing than, you know, what was happening with the Black Lives Matter riots,
right.
when you're sort of directly attacking a locus of sort of national control.
Yeah.
Too. That's also very different from, like, you know, even like burning down a local police station.
Right.
Right? It's a sort of very different thing. All the people who were armed, and when you look at sort of the inciting forces, there was nobody in Black Lives Matter protests who was like the one person who was going around saying, you know what we should do? We should, you know, overthrow the police.
Right.
Right? And there was actually, in the fact that it was, you know, politicians, soon to be ex-politicians, with Trump being like,
you hope.
Yeah. Well, in Trump's case.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
But going like, oh, well, the results were wrong. I think the results should be changed. Yeah. It would be
let's go to the Hill.
It would be a real shame if something happened to the people where the results were being.
You got a nice restaurant here. It'd be a real shame if something bad happened to it.
Organized, and so it was actually like a lot more targeted of an action being taken, and so in all ways, you know, in intention and everything else, it was, you know, they're not the same thing, right? It's a group of people who organize in a place, and actions were taken which make some people uncomfortable. And I think that's where you can say that, like, their similarities sort of end for the most part.
And I think you can't really ignore the intention. Like, it'd be wrong to just look at what happened only. I mean, and what happened was still bad at the riot at the Capitol. Because the underlying principle of protest is that well, maybe it's not the underlying principle. What it is that let me just say, protest, I think, isn't inherently bad. Mm-hmm. It is a way to try to bring about change for people who otherwise don't have the mechanism to do it. Yeah. And if you look at compare one to the other, right? One is protesting racism and police brutality. And we are seeing lots of objective evidence that there is police brutality. And I should probably say ahead of time, too, that before I get into it, is that, I mean, we're going by what they say is their intention. You can make assumptions about what you think they want to do, but if we give both sides the benefit of the doubt and we go by the best interpretation, which is what they're telling you they want to do, it's not even close. You're protesting
police brutality, and you're also getting police brutality happening,
police
inflicted on you, over and over and over again every time you come out and protest.
Yeah, and there have been arguments about whether there are elements of racism involved, and I think the arguments are a little bit of crap. I think there definitely is racism, and I don't think that just because there's brutality against white people, that does not in any way negate the fact that there is racism on top of that. Yeah. And so it's funny, right? Because in a lot of ways, it's like the shift from climate change deniers to become, so they're no longer denying climate change. Now they're denying that climate change was a result of human intervention. Yeah. And there was always climate change happening. And now that the evidence for it has become a little bit overwhelming, deniers are sort of re-entrenching behind the next barricade saying, well, humans didn't cause it. And in fact, what's even funnier is that you're seeing another group re-entrenching again, saying, well, it's gotten so bad there's nothing we can do, which is the total flip side of what it was. Really, it was just making up arguments so they could justify not doing anything.
I think the next layer is maybe people talking about how the models aren't exact, and you can't use the models to make significant predictions far into the future, so we can say that we have no clue what the actual, like, how bad the problem actually is. Yeah. Which is true to a certain extent. We don't actually know. Like, the models have a limited guessing capacity. Yeah. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't work on it. Right, the fact that we maybe have a really big problem and we maybe don't, we don't know exactly how bad it's going to be until we get there, means that we should probably make sure that it's not a big problem, just in case.
Especially when we talked about this, how preventative care and preventative stuff tends to be poo-pooed if you're successful. Mm-hmm. That this is, the potential for what could happen is so catastrophic. Might as well do something. Yeah. Right? You might as well, man, I really wish we hadn't saved the environment. Man, I really wish we kept burning. Like, how often are you going to hear people say that? I totally lost the thread of what I was saying about the protest. But, so that was one side of the protest. The other side was they're protesting against fraudulent voting. There are mechanisms in place if you want to challenge the results of an election. They took them. They failed. Again, it's just a whole different a thing. I can't think of any words. I've run out of words. It is. I think if you're going to talk about holding people accountable, I think you should hold them accountable. I think there's an inherent difference about what they did and what their intentions are, and both of those matter.
Yeah. And, I don't think they're arresting people, or I don't think anybody's losing their jobs just because they were there.
Yeah.
Right? Is the other thing, too. Which is that, like, we talked about how... It wasn't Gab. We talked about how that one platform, Parler, got hacked, right?
Yeah.
And a bunch of tweets got, like, leaked and stuff. The
Right.
people that they're tracking down aren't gonna be, like, anybody who was there. Because there was a bunch of, like, reporters there. There was independent reporters there. There were people who were probably there just to check out what was going on. There were people there who were just there to actually peacefully protest. And then, there was, like, a bunch of people who stormed the Capitol, right? And so I think, I can understand why you wouldn't necessarily want companies releasing, like, purchase information surrounding the Capitol. Right. And you'd be worried about what people are going to do with that information. And I think that there is actually a very fair point to be made about, like, what right to privacy people have.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the cases where, like, I don't know what you would do with that data other than to cross-reference against people who committed, violence there, but you want to even more thoroughly place them there. But so, like, I'm going to be honest, I don't actually understand what the value of, like, releasing that information is. And I think there is actually a good argument potentially against having private companies, give up your personal information like that. I think that is fair. Yeah. And I don't love that. But we also have to see what they do with that. Right?
Right. I don't have a lot of faith in large corporations either.
Yeah.
I gotta tell you.
So, if they are, if there is, like, significant consequences for people who were just there and just hanging out, and then, like, a company, like, releases, like, their name based off of, like, a credit card, payment, and that person, like, loses their job, I think that sucks too.
Right.
Right? And, like, for what it's worth, I think that even that happening, right, it would be hard for me to be as up in arms about that as, like, police brutality.
Right.
Like, somebody getting, like, beat up, maimed by the cops. And, like, the groups of people who were having that happen to them, in the wake of the, like, Black Lives Matter protests.
Right.
But I would also think that sucks too, right? Like, I think anybody who's just showing up somewhere and who is accidentally or incidentally getting involved with a group of people who are doing really terrible stuff and sort of gets caught up in the crossfire, I think that sucks. And I think that, there would have been people there who really buy into the lies that people like Trump fed them.
Right.
And whose issue is a lack of access to information and a lack of support from anybody else to be sort of seduced by what feels like their best option for support. Right. And so, there are going to be people who do bad things for what are ultimately understandable reasons. And I can both have compassion for those people and not respect the choices that they're making.
Not subscribe to what they believe.
And also I can condemn them for the decisions that they ended up making. Right. And if they're causing people actual harm. Right. Even if I can sort of understand and have sympathy for how they got to where they are.
Right.
So, it's complicated. I don't love if corporations are giving people's information out like that. But I think on the balance, we have seen, like, I think there needed to be an upgraded response to Capitol Hill.
Right.
In terms of accountability. And I think there is a disproportionate response in terms of how the Black Lives Matter people were treated in terms of brutality and aggression. I think where I ultimately come down on it. I think that's probably the best way to summarize how I feel about it. I think they need to meet in the middle a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Got nothing to add to that.
So there we go. Our next comment comes from T-Player, and they say, "Hi, I took your advice about building more towards basic attacks instead of specials, since I don't have nor the Tantu Totem nor the Death Cart. I see a little improvement in my team's performance, and I have to agree with you, my team is kind of flawed, but somehow it works fine. I didn't find myself struggling against stronger teams even before the re-gearing, but I can say for sure the boost of basic attack damage helped me. Thanks for the help."
And it ties into not the next question, but the one after that. I thought it would. Maybe we'll just.
Yeah. So the next question comes from Kobe Day.
Yeah.
And they say, "Hey guys, I just want to say I'm so glad people like you are keeping Injustice alive, so thanks for that. Was just wondering what, in your opinion, is an underrated gear setup that isn't used by many people? Also, what character do you think is the likelihood that the game will be updated at some point?"
Yeah, I think the likelihood it's going to be updated is pretty low. At least updated in a way that matters. I think that what they've been doing is updating it enough so that it doesn't fall afoul of whatever the requirements of the Google Play Store and the what's the Apple Store called? Is it Apple Store?
Play Store? No, not the Play Store. Sorry, iTunes Store. I think. I don't know.
Is it? Yeah. So any kind of material upgrade, I think, is not going to happen. It's been too long, and I think I'll tell you what the most interesting question is underrated gear setup, and we just really heard from T Player, right, that going all in on basic damage gears when you don't have Tantu Totem or Master's Death Cart, which are necessary in order to push a special team, because otherwise what you're doing is you're giving, in order to generate the power, if you don't have those gears, you are spending a huge amount of time leaving yourself vulnerable. You're waiting too long in a fight to generate the power. Mm-hmm. You're going to just lose more. So I think the most underrated gear setup is basic attack boost. Mm-hmm. And actually one other gear that's, even when you are going in on specials and you're going for special 2, the most underrated gear is probably Demonic Blade, because it's the only gear, despite only being 2.5 stars, it's the only gear that will boost special 2 damage and boost special 2 crit chance at the same time. Nothing else does that. So 15% boost damage, crit chance 30%. That's pretty good because it only takes up 1 slot. Mm-hmm. And you know what? There's another question. I think we're kind of out of time,
so we'll have to save it.
We'll save it because I think it's a bit more of an involved question, and yeah. So we rambled quite a bit.
We did
this time. That's all right.
Yeah. We always say we're not going to, and then we do. But good news is we have more content then coming up, so look forward to that. At the end of the episode, we have some stuff that we like to say. People we like to thank. So a shout out to Eliza Catfood Caton. She incurred the wrath of her cat and got bit. She got chewed up a little bit.
Ooh.
And this shout out
break skin?
Yeah.
Ooh.
So this shout out was brought to you by just trying to pet a cat, but the cat having other plans.
I'm so glad CB isn't like that.
No, he's not an aggressive man. He's very gentle.
Oh, I hope she gets better soon.
Yeah.
I hope she doesn't get an infection. There's
hope she can repair the relationship with her cat.
Oh,
yeah, unfortunate. We also like to give a huge thank you to everybody who supports us on Patreon.
Yeah, and that would be Consul Peasant and Edwoon at the top tier last word, Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier, Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, and Eddydoo, who support us on the credited level, and Chris Wolf, Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 2-for-1, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isfar E at the gratitude level.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.
Komoda.